人間の寿命は短いって分かっていたのに、なんでもっと知ろうと思わなかったんだろう。
This question, asked too late, standing over the grave of someone who can never answer, is the beginning of Frieren's journey. But it's also the culmination of a tragedy 1,000 years in the making. Because Frieren didn't fail to understand that human lives were short. She's an elf who's lived for over a millennium. She's watched countless humans age and die. She understood with perfect clarity that Himmel's time was limited. The tragedy isn't ignorance, it's inaction. It's knowing something intellectually but not living as if it's true. It's having all the information you need to make the right choice and still choosing wrong. It's the cruelest form of regret, realizing you had time and you wasted it. For Frieren, a 1,000-year-old elf, a decade with Himmel the Hero was nothing, a brief distraction in an endless existence. 10 years to defeat the Demon King and save the world felt like a weekend trip. But for Himmel, that decade was everything: his youth, his purpose, his love. And by the time Frieren understood the weight of those 10 years, Himmel was already gone. This is the philosophy of Frieren, Beyond Journey's End. A story about what it means to live forever in a world where everyone you could love is ephemeral. About learning, far too late, that time perceived and time valued are two entirely different things. And about an immortal's journey to understand the one thing her endless lifespan prevents her from grasping, that fleeting things can matter most of all. To understand Frieren, you first have to understand what it means to live for 1,000 years. Frieren is an elf, one of the few remaining members of a nearly extinct race with lifespans stretching into millennia. She was born in a world so different from the present that even she can barely remember it. She's lived through the rise and fall of kingdoms, the birth and death of languages, the evolution of entire civilizations, and through it all, she's been alone. Not physically. She's encountered countless people over her long life, but fundamentally, existentially alone. Because everyone she meets will die before she even begins to age. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine knowing, with certainty, that every friend you make will be gone within a human lifetime, which, for Frieren, feels like the blink of an eye. Would you invest emotionally in those relationships? Would you bother learning their stories, their dreams, their fears? Or would you keep them at arm's length, knowing the pain that comes from attachment? Frieren chose distance. Frieren isn't cold by nature, she's cold by necessity. When you live for 1,000 years, emotions work differently. The death of a companion might grieve a human for years, but for Frieren, that grief would need to last centuries to match the proportion of life lost. And if she grieved properly for everyone who died around her, she'd spend her entire immortal existence in mourning. So instead, she learned not to feel, or more accurately, she learned to feel in a different way, a muted, distant way that protects her from the constant cycle of loss that defines an immortal's experience. She stopped investing in human relationships. She stopped trying to understand their emotions. She stopped caring about the small moments that humans treasure. Because when you have infinite time, every moment becomes meaningless. Why remember a sunset when you'll see 10,000 more? Why treasure a conversation when you'll have millions of conversations over your lifespan? Why learn someone's favorite flower when they'll be dead in 60 years? Which for you is next week? This is how Frieren survived 1,000 years. By treating life as something abundant, therefore cheap. Then, 50 years before the series begins, something unusual happened. A young human named Himmel, a hero destined to defeat the Demon King, sought out Frieren to be his party's mage. She had given up on defeating demons 500 years earlier, but Himmel convinced her to join. Along with Hyder the priest and Eisen the warrior, they embarked on a 10-year journey to defeat the Demon King and bring peace to the world. And they succeeded. It should have been an epic adventure, the kind that defines a lifetime. But for Frieren, it was just 10 years. 10 years out of a 1,000-year existence is 1% of her life. She was present, she fought, she traveled with them, but she didn't connect with them. When Himmel would try to talk about his dreams, Frieren barely listened. When Hyder made jokes, she didn't understand them. When they celebrated victories, she remained detached. Not because she disliked them, but because in her perception of time, this was temporary. They would be gone soon, and she was right. After the Demon King's defeat, the party disbanded. Frieren said goodbye and wandered off alone, returning to her solitary existence. 50 years passed. For Frieren, 50 years felt like 5 weeks. 50 years after their journey ended, Frieren returned to watch the Era meteors, a celestial event that occurs once every 50 years. Himmel had asked her, all those years ago, to come back and watch it with them again, and she did. Because for an elf, 50 years is nothing. It barely felt like any time had passed at all. When she arrived, everything had changed. Himmel was old, his hair had grayed, his movements were slower. The young hero she remembered was now an elderly man approaching the end of his life, and Frieren hadn't aged a single day. They watched the meteor shower together one last time, and shortly after, Himmel died. At his funeral, Frieren cried, but she didn't understand why. She had known this would happen. She had known human lives were short. She had known Himmel would die. So why did it hurt? Standing at Himmel's grave, Frieren realized something that shattered her entire worldview. She had barely known him. They had spent 10 years together, an entire decade, a significant portion of a human's life, but she couldn't remember his favorite food. She didn't know what made him laugh. She had never asked him about his dreams beyond defeating the Demon King. She had treated him like a temporary companion, someone who would be gone soon, so why bother getting attached? And now he was gone, and she would never have the chance to know him. This is when Frieren asked herself the question that would define the rest of her immortal life. I knew human lives were short. Why didn't I try to get to know him better? It wasn't ignorance. She had known. She had understood intellectually that humans die quickly, but knowing and understanding are not the same thing. She knew human lives were short the way you know that you'll die someday, as an abstract fact that doesn't affect how you live. She never truly understood what that shortness meant until it was too late to do anything about it. Regret is uniquely human, or at least, it's uniquely tied to beings with finite lifespans. Humans regret because they understand scarcity. They have limited time, so wasted time feels like a loss. They have limited opportunities, so missed chances hurt. But for an immortal, regret should be impossible. With infinite time, nothing is truly lost. You can always try again, meet someone new, have another adventure. Except Himmel. Himmel was lost, permanently, irrevocably. And for the first time in her 1,000-year existence, Frieren understood what humans feel every day, the pain of something being gone forever. This is the paradox of immortality that Frieren discovers. You can live forever, but the people you meet cannot. And once they're gone, no amount of time will bring them back. Immortality doesn't protect you from loss. It just means you'll experience loss forever. Frieren had been here before, she just didn't remember. Centuries earlier, Frieren had lost someone else, Flam, her human mentor. Flam had saved young Frieren after demons destroyed her village and taught her magic for decades until Flam died of old age. Flam understood something about Frieren that Frieren didn't understand about herself, that one day, Frieren would make this exact mistake. Flamma predicted that Frieren, in her youthful naivety, young for an elf despite being centuries old, would fail to appreciate the mortals around her, that she would let important people slip away without truly knowing them. And Flam left behind a gift for when that day came, a grimoire with clues leading to Oriel, a place where souls are said to rest, where Frieren might be able to speak with the dead. Flam knew Frieren would need a second chance to say goodbye, because Flam understood what Frieren was still learning. Immortals don't just outlive people, they outlive their chances to understand them. Let's talk about why immortality creates this problem in the first place. For humans, time is inherently valuable because it's scarce. You have roughly 80 years, give or take. Every moment matters because there are only so many moments. But for Frieren, who will live for thousands of years, time works differently. Imagine you have $1 million in your bank account. Would you stress over spending $5 on coffee? Probably not. It's such a small fraction of your wealth that it feels meaningless. That's how Frieren experiences time. 10 years with Himmel, that's 1% of her current lifespan, and she'll live for centuries more. It's the equivalent of a human spending 3 days with someone. 50 years between meteor showers, that's 5% of her life. For a human, that would be equivalent to waiting about 4 years. When time is abundant, individual moments lose their weight. This is why Frieren didn't invest in Himmel. Not because she was cruel, but because her perception of time made their relationship feel temporary. and insignificant. But here's the cruel twist that Frieren discovers. Just because you have infinite time doesn't mean the people around you do. Himmel only had 80 years. For him, those 10 years with Frieren were 12.5% of his entire existence. They were formative, precious, irreplaceable. And while Frieren could have 10,000 more adventures over her long life, Himmel could never have another adventure with Frieren. This creates a fundamental asymmetry in their relationship. For Frieren, Himmel was one of many companions she'd meet over millennia. For Himmel, Frieren was one of the most important people in his entire life. This isn't about one person caring more than the other. It's about different scales of time creating different scales of meaning. And Frieren, operating on her scale of time, completely missed what their relationship meant on Himmel's scale. Frieren's journey forces us to confront a philosophical question that humans rarely consider. Does mortality give life meaning? There's a school of thought that argues yes, that life is precious precisely because it's finite. That if we live forever, nothing would matter because we could always do it later. Frieren's story suggests this might be true. When you have infinite time, individual moments become disposable. Why treasure this sunset when you'll see thousands more? Why invest in this person when you'll meet countless others? Abundance breeds carelessness. Scarcity breeds appreciation. This is why humans, despite having only decades, often live more intensely than Frieren does in centuries. They know their time is limited, so they squeeze meaning from every moment. Frieren, who had all the time in the world, let meaning slip through her fingers because she thought she could always pick it up later. Except with Himmel, there was no later. There's another curse of immortality that Frieren faces. Memory becomes a burden. When you live for 1,000 years, you accumulate memories that no one else shares. You become a living archive of people, places, and moments that have long since faded from history. Frieren is one of the last people who remembers Flam as a real person rather than a legend. She remembers villages that no longer exist, kingdoms that have fallen, people whose names have been forgotten by everyone but her. And now, she's the only one who remembers the real Himmel. Not Himmel the hero, the legendary figure, but Himmel the person. His quirks, his habits, the way he smiled. As everyone who knew him dies, Frieren becomes his sole memorial. And eventually, even she will forget. Because memory fades, even for immortals, even for elves. Given enough time, everything becomes hazy, then myth, then nothing. The series shows this beautifully. Frieren encounters statues and stories of heroes from centuries past, and even she, who was alive during their time, can barely remember them. If even the immortals forget, then what's the point of anything? After Himmel's death, Frieren makes a decision. She will retrace their journey together. Her goal isn't to have another adventure, it's to understand what she missed. She recruits Fern, a young human mage and apprentice, and later Stark, a young warrior. Together they travel north toward Oriel, the place where souls are said to rest, where Frieren hopes to see Himmel again and give him a proper farewell. But this journey is different from her journey with Himmel. This time, she's paying attention. She asks questions. She learns about Fern and Stark. She notices their dreams, their fears, their relationships. She's still awkward. She still doesn't fully understand human emotions, but she's trying. And in trying, she begins to realize what she missed with Himmel. There's a spell that appears throughout the series, a spell to create a field of flowers. It's Frieren's favorite spell, and it was also Flam's favorite spell. From a practical standpoint, it's completely useless. It doesn't defeat enemies, it doesn't solve problems. It serves no purpose except to create beauty for a brief moment. Saria, Flam's master and Frieren's grand mentor, calls it a waste of time. Why would anyone spend decades perfecting a spell that does nothing useful? But Flam loved it, and she passed that love to Frieren, and Frieren performed it at Himmel's grave. Why? Because it was Himmel's favorite flower, because he once said it was beautiful, because it connects her to a memory of him being happy. This is what Frieren is learning, that seemingly meaningless things carry weight when they're connected to people you love. A useless spell, a favorite food, a silly joke. None of these things matter in the grand scheme of a 1,000-year life, but they're what make a person real to you. They're the details that transform someone from a concept into a presence, and Frieren collected none of these details about Himmel when he was alive. As Frieren travels with Fern and Stark, she starts to change, in subtle ways. She still perceives time differently than humans. She still occasionally forgets that weeks matter to mortals. She still treats years like days. But now, when Fern gets upset about something, Frieren tries to understand why, even if the reason seems trivial to her. When Stark is afraid, Frieren remembers that bravery looks different when you have only decades to live instead of millennia. She's learning to see the world through mortal eyes, even though she doesn't have mortal eyes herself. This is incredibly difficult. It's like trying to understand poverty when you're wealthy, or fear when you've never been in danger. Frieren has infinite time, so grasping the urgency of mortality requires empathy that goes against her nature. But she's trying, because she doesn't want to make the same mistake twice. One of Frieren's defining characteristics is her obsessive collection of spells, especially useless spells that serve no combat purpose. She has a spell to turn grapes sour, a spell to make laundry dry faster, a spell to detect if milk has spoiled. Why would someone spend decades learning these trivial spells? Because for Frieren, magic is how she preserves memory. Every spell she learns is connected to a person or a moment. The flower spell reminds her of Flam and Himmel. A silly spell reminds her of a village they once visited. A combat spell reminds her of a demon they fought. When you live for 1,000 years, memory becomes unreliable. Details fade, people blur together. You need anchors to hold on to what mattered. For Frieren, spells are those anchors. This is her way of fighting against the erosion of time. She collects these magical fragments not because they're useful, but because they help her remember who people were and what they cared about. It's a desperate attempt to hold on to something that immortality constantly threatens to take away. The specificity of individual lives. But there's a dark side to this. Frieren is becoming a living museum of forgotten people. She carries memories that no one else shares. She preserves stories that would otherwise be lost. And one day, she'll be the last person who remembers Himmel. Not Himmel the legend. History will remember that. But Himmel the person. Himmel who loved dungeons. Himmel who made statues everywhere they traveled. Himmel who gave Frieren a ring she didn't understand was a symbol of eternal love. When Frieren eventually forgets these details, and she will, given enough time, Himmel will truly be gone. This is the burden of immortality. You don't just outlive people, you outlive their memory. You become the last guardian of their existence, and when you fail, they disappear completely. Through her journey, Frieren is slowly learning a lesson that takes mortals a lifetime to understand, but takes immortals centuries. The most precious things are precisely the things that don't last. A flower blooms for days, not years, and that's why it's beautiful. A human lives for decades, not millennia, and that's why their time matters. A moment of connection is fleeting, and that's what makes it valuable. Frieren spent 1,000 years treating fleeting things as disposable. After all, there would always be another flower, another human, another moment. But Himmel taught her, through his absence, that some fleeting things are irreplaceable. Yes, she'll meet other humans, but she'll never meet another Himmel. Yes, she'll have other adventures, but she'll never have another journey with Himmel at her side. The abundance of time doesn't diminish the uniqueness of specific moments, it just tricks you into thinking it does. So let's return to the question that started this journey. I knew human lives were short, why didn't I try to get to know him better? The answer Frieren discovers is complex, but ultimately this. Because knowing something intellectually is not the same as understanding it emotionally. Frieren knew Himmel would die. She had watched countless humans die. She understood mortality as a concept, but she didn't feel the weight of it. She didn't understand that short for her is entire, for a human. She didn't grasp that Himmel's limited time made every moment with him precious. She treated his lifespan as short because, from her perspective, it was. But she failed to understand that from his perspective, it was everything he had. This is the fundamental problem with immortality. It gives you infinite time to understand mortality, but infinite time is precisely what prevents you from understanding it. You can't truly grasp scarcity when you live in abundance. You can't fully appreciate fleeting moments when you have endless moments ahead of you. Frieren's story is haunted by the phrase, too late. She realized too late that she wanted to know Himmel, She understood too late what their time together meant. She learned too late how to connect with mortals. And too late has a special cruelty for immortals. For a human, too late might mean you have regrets for the rest of your life, which might be 20 or 30 years. For Frieren, too late means she'll carry this regret for centuries, possibly millennia. Her life will stretch on long after everyone who knew Himmel has died, and she'll still be standing there, wishing she had asked him one more question. The longer you live with your regrets. This is why many philosophical traditions argue that immortality would be a curse, not a gift. Yes, you'd have infinite time to experience things, but you'd also have infinite time to mourn what you lost, to regret what you failed to do, to remember everyone who's gone. But Frieren's story isn't nihilistic. It's not a story about how immortality makes everything meaningless. Instead, it's a story about how even immortals can learn and grow, even if it takes centuries. Frieren is learning to appreciate the ephemeral. She's learning to invest in Fern and Stark even though she knows they'll die. She's learning to treasure small moments even though she'll experience millions more. She's learning that just because something is temporary doesn't mean it's meaningless. In fact, its temporary nature might be precisely what makes it meaningful. She's learning to live as if time is scarce, even though for her, it isn't. This is incredibly difficult. It goes against every instinct she's developed over 1,000 years. But she's doing it because the alternative, another 1,000 years of missing connections, of letting people slip away, of living without truly living, is unbearable. Frieren isn't trying to become more human. That's impossible. She will always perceive time differently. She will always outlive everyone she meets. But she's trying to become more present. She's learning to ask the questions she should have asked Himmel. She's learning to notice the details that make a person unique. She's learning to engage with mortality even though she doesn't experience it herself. And in doing so, she's ensuring that when Fern and Stark eventually die, and they will, she won't be standing at their graves, asking the same question she asked at Himmel's. Why didn't I try to get to know them better? She's learning to love people not despite their mortality, but because of it. Frieren's story speaks to a universal human experience, even though she's immortal. We all treat time as if we have more of it than we do. We put off visiting loved ones because we'll do it later. We don't ask the questions we're curious about because there's always tomorrow. We assume people will always be around, so we don't need to appreciate them now. And then, suddenly, they're gone. And later becomes never. Frieren had 1,000 years to learn this lesson. You have decades. The question isn't whether human lives are short, they objectively are. The question is, what are you doing with that knowledge? Are you living as if the people you love will always be there? Or are you treating each moment with them as the precious, unrepeatable thing it is? Frieren learned this lesson 1,000 years too late. You still have time. I knew human lives were short. Why didn't I try to get to know him better? This question will haunt Frieren for the rest of her immortal life. There's no answer that will bring Himmel back. No amount of understanding will undo her regret. But the question itself has transformed her. She's no longer the elf who treats mortals as fleeting distractions. She's become someone who treasures the ephemeral precisely because it's ephemeral. She still perceives time differently than humans. She probably always will. But now she understands something that 1,000 years of experience couldn't teach her. Time perceived and time valued are not the same thing. You can have all the time in the world and still waste it. You can have only decades and fill them with meaning. The length of time matters far less than what you do with it. Frieren's journey toward Oriel isn't really about reaching a destination. It's about learning to inhabit the present instead of seeing it as just another moment in an endless series of moments. It's about understanding that some things, some people, are irreplaceable, even when you have infinite time to find replacements. It's about learning, 1,000 years too late, that fleeting doesn't mean meaningless, it means precious. And maybe, if she can carry this lesson forward for the next 1,000 years, Himmel's death won't have been in vain. Maybe the elf who couldn't understand mortality can become the elf who teaches others, mortal and immortal alike, how to value the time they have. Not because time is all we have, but because the people we spend it with are all we'll ever have. That's the philosophy of Frieren. Beyond Journey's End, an immortal's journey to understand what she should have known all along. That knowing something and living as if it's true are worlds apart. If you've ever looked back and wished you'd spent more time with someone or asked more questions or paid more attention, Frieren's story is for you, because it reminds us that later is not guaranteed, that the people we love won't always be here. That time, however abundant it seems, is the one thing we can never get back. If this resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do differently if you truly understood how short time is? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more anime philosophy that explores the deepest questions about life, death, and meaning. Until next time, don't wait 1,000 years to tell people they matter. They might not have 1,000 years to wait.